Many podcasters feel that they are not equipped to be a leader for their audience, and it's sad. So in this episode, I'll be sharing a simple principle that will allow you to be the leader your audience needs, even if you don't feel like one. Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Alec Casson with Impact Podcaster Academy, where we help podcasters create more impact and income with their show without needing to go viral or have those pesky sponsors. This is a lesson that I'm going to share with you that I had the pleasure of learning firsthand after going through many sleepless nights and actually having several nervous breakdowns, actually. But I hope that what I'm going to share with you will help you avoid many of the same challenges on your own journey when it comes to podcasting. And I call this lesson the one step ahead principle. So in college, a pastor buddy of mine, they asked me if I could help lead a Bible study group. And one of the leaders apparently, I guess they had backed out last minute and they needed someone to replace them. And even though I was reading the Bible at the time, I in no way felt qualified to lead other people through this very thick, massive book. But this pastor friend of mine, he reassured me. He's like, buddy, the group's not going to start for another week. You got plenty of time to prepare. So I was like, all right, I'll do it. But then, of course, being a last minute college student who does everything, right at the deadline, an entire week went by and I had totally forgot to do any preparation for the group. And I only had a few hours before people were starting to, that people would arrive. So what I did was I sat down, I read the chapter, wrote down some notes, some different I was like, oh, that's a pretty cool thing, cool idea. I wrote that down. And then I wrote down some questions, stuff that I thought could be pretty cool to ask in the group. And last but not least, I went to Google and I looked up some really cool facts, stuff that I thought people would enjoy. So there was only a couple minutes to spare. People started to arrive. And when it was time for the group to start, I just simply went through the stuff that I had already read. I asked the questions that I wrote down. Then I shared the cool facts that I learned from Google. And what was really funny, actually, is that many of the people in the group, they were like, man, this Alec guy knows a lot about the Bible. Even a few people in group, they came up to me afterwards and they were asking me about how they could better prepare for leading their own groups in the future. The thing that was funny is little did they know is that I was not light years ahead of them in terms of any biblical knowledge. In fact, just a couple hours earlier, I knew as little as they did. But by simply being a chapter ahead of them, I was able to lead the group. And the same is true for you and leading your audience. It's funny, actually, I shared this story with my dad, and at the time he was reading a book called Catch Me If You Can. And for those of you who don't know the story, it's basically about this real person who impersonated being a pilot, a college professor, a doctor, and a whole bunch of other things. Meanwhile, he's evading police officers, forging checks, flying in planes for free. And eventually, after a while, he was finally caught, and someone asked him, how in the world did you pull off some of these stunts? Especially the whole thing of impersonating a college professor. This dude apparently taught a whole semester and had never gone to college himself. And the person was like, how in the world did you pull that off? And the guy was like, well, all I had to do was just read one chapter ahead of the students, and then I would just teach them what I read. And I was like, wow, that's hilarious. So you see, you don't have to be this person who's at the top of Mount Everest in order to lead other people there. If anything, if you're at the top of Mount Everest, you can't lead anyone up there. Because if you're at the top and people at the bottom, you can't be like, make the next left. No, your other left. No, they're not going to hear you. You see, a good leader can simply be someone that's just a couple steps ahead of the crowd. So here are some of the general steps when it comes to following this idea of the one step ahead principle. First things first is you got to get started now, not later. The second thing is you got to meet your audience where they're currently at. Third thing is you got to learn what they need to learn. And the fourth thing is you got to engross yourself in that material. Dive deep into it. Last but not least, you got to start leading them on their transformational journey. Start leading them with the stuff that you've learned along the way. And you're probably thinking okay, well, I can see how this makes sense to an educational podcast, but how in the world would this apply to like an entertainment focused podcast. And the principle, it's still very much the same, but instead of being one step ahead in terms of like information, you have to just be one step ahead in terms of embodying the character that your audience wants for themselves. So for example, many people admire certain celebrities because those celebrities embody characteristics that they wish were more prominent in themselves. It could be good looks, it could be humor, it could be having a positive outlook, maybe more confidence, things like that. The reason why people look up to The Rock is because he's got muscles. They want more muscles. You see how that works? So when it comes to your audience and inspiring them, you just have to embody the characteristics that they wish they had for themselves. And a really cool hack for this, let's say it's like, oh, well, I don't have a lot of muscles to have people like want to be like me. Totally fine. A really cool hack that works across every single niche, requires little to no skill, is to simply be authentic. Everyone wants to be around those who are authentic. Everyone wishes they could be a little bit more authentic themselves. So by simply being yourself, you're being authentic, which in and of itself is attractive for a lot of people. But if you're thinking like, I don't know, Alec, I wouldn't feel comfortable leading people on something like a transformational journey until I'm much further in my own journey, and not until I'm more experienced. I want to have years of experience under my belt. Well, unless you're a doctor, a lot of us really don't need years and decades of experience. In fact, I would say you need to start leading people on a transformational journey sooner rather than later. Because imagine if Kobe Bryant said, I'm not going to start playing basketball until I'm a professional. It's like, what? It'd be like saying, I'm going to start exercising when I'm in shape. It's like, no, that's backwards. For Kobe to be a pro at basketball, he had to start playing basketball. And when he started to play basketball, he started to develop those skills that got him to be a professional. Same thing for being in shape. If you want to be in shape, you have to start exercising. So if you wait until you feel like an expert or a pro, you're actually putting yourself and others at a disadvantage. And there's actually, I forgot what the term is called. I should have looked it up ahead of time. I think it's called like the Dunning-Kruger effect. I could be totally off with that. Don't quote me on it. But the premise behind what I'm about to share with you is the important part, not so much the name. But as people, as we get more knowledgeable in a thing, in the beginning, we're talking about it a lot because we're learning some new stuff. We feel like we really understand it. So we're talking about it with everyone. But then as we learn more, ironically, we also begin to learn that we don't know as much. So as we're learning more, we learn that there's more that we need to learn, so we feel like less of an expert in that area. So you got people out there who are sharing all this knowledge, they're sharing what the little they know, but they're sharing that little a lot. And you got people who know a lot, but are sharing a little. It's like this weird inverse effect, So if you wait until you feel like this expert or this pro, you're really hurting yourself and you're hurting others. Imagine like a basketball coach saying, I can't coach basketball until I'm a pro, like Kobe Bryant. It's like, what if that was the case, no one would be coaching basketball. In fact, not even Kobe Bryant's coach would have been coaching Kobe Bryant because he's not Kobe Bryant. So this issue of feeling like we aren't equipped to lead, the issue isn't that you lack the ability to lead others. Oftentimes, it's just that you're afraid you can't meet your own expectations. Am I right or am I wrong here? We have such high standards that we expect of ourselves that we doubt we can lead others because we're not meeting those expectations. But I want to point something out to you. I bet that growing up, you looked up to people who didn't need to land on the moon, who didn't need to be in the NBA in order for them to have your attention. I bet you looked up to a family member, a teacher, a friend, or they didn't have to be superheroes in order for you to look up to them that way. I bet even today, I bet today there are average people who you admire because they embody some type of trait or characteristic that you respect. So why then are you holding yourself to such a high standard to even get started when you don't even hold others to such a ridiculous standard? You see, like all great successes, all of them built by average people. The local neighborhood coach who helped someone like Kobe Bryant in his early years, I would say is just as important as the coach that helped him in the NBA. And those who have achieved great success, they did so because they were helped by average people too. Think of the person that came up with the equations that helped land people on the moon. They got into math and they got into science because of just like a public school teacher, you know? As Craig Groeschel says in his leadership podcast, he says that people would rather follow a leader who is always real than a leader who is always right. And that could be you. All you got to do is just be real. So, some key points to keep in mind here as we wrap up this episode. I want you to know that a good leader can simply just be a couple steps ahead of the crowd. It's better to start now, not later. And last but not least, our self-imposed high standards often prevent us from influencing and leading others in a positive way. So I want to know, who are just some regular, everyday people that you admire in your life? Like, do you know of any good stories of successful people who had humble beginnings? If you don't, then go Google some. So anyway, thank you so much for listening. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.